Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, of a very special guest, returning guest. His name is Jeremy Kuzmarov. You can see him here if you're watching this on my three YouTube channels, X, Rumble, or now Substack. And I had him on not very recently, like within the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think, to talk about a great article that he wrote about Timothy Leary on Covert Action, the website, formerly Covert Action magazine, back before the internet. I used to read it when I was at Berkeley. I would go into these kind of like, they used to have these things called magazine shops, and you would go in and like these magazines that, you could only find in certain places you could get. I was so poor at the time. I would go in and read it and then just stick it back in the stack. But you could get away with that back in the day. I don't know. Those magazine shops are all gone. I used to work at one at Berkeley, and they're all gone. But it's a very important magazine for a lot of pure political stuff material that you wouldn't find on the corporate media at all. Much like his most recent book, anyway. I talked to him about this great Leary article he did, and then I get all these things from Amazon literally 2 or 3 days ago. I think it's 2 days ago. I got something from Amazon, the notification, and he had told me in our last interview who's publishing this book. But Amazon sends me this email, and there it is. The title of the new book that he's just published this week, July 2026, is Political Assassinations in America, the Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. I've read through it. I'm familiar with some of the material. Some of the stuff is totally unique to me, things I haven't researched. I've had a lot of the people that he used as research sources on my show in the past, such as Lisa Peace, Mark Shaw, Tim Tate, Joseph McBride, did a lot of JFK stuff. Tippett, Adam about Tippett. Also, I was interested to see this guy Butt about Nugan Hand too. So I don't see that around, but I interviewed him about his excellent podcast. He's from Australia, which is kind of the nexus where I guess it's the southern hemispheres where Nugan Hand kind of took place. With some of these characters who pop up in this book and who had long careers and then mysteriously disappeared and were found in rivers or strange things. And this compilation of these cases is really important because sometimes, just like these authors that I've said, they go into one in detail and look at all the problems with them. But this book is an overview of all those. So it just shows the history of dark operations and assassinations that have taken place in the U.S., going back to Lincoln. I think he starts off at Lincoln and goes all the way up to the present Kirk, which is still the arguments about Kirk, which we're nearing the 1-year anniversary, are really going online. They're pretty ferocious battles, at least the ones that I see on my social media. But he also mentions people I really admire. Hank Albarelli's books on mind control, and Frank Olson, Jacobson also, and then Kinzer, who wrote The Poisoner in Chief, who was just in these MK Ultra hearings within the last 3 days, or 3 or 4 weeks, excuse me. But there's a lot to cover, a lot to get into. Oh, also, the other shows we did, this will be your 4th episode. I mentioned the Leary. We also covered one about did J. Edgar Hoover order the assassination of MLK? And then also one of his other books, which is Warmonger, How Clinton's Malign Foreign Policy Launched the U.S. Trajectory from Bush to Biden. And that was a new book back in 2023. But he can kind of lead up and follow up with the audience about his research leading up to this new book, Political Assassinations in America. So, Jeremy Kuzmarov, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Sorry, long intro. There's lots to trying to tie in all these pieces.
Our great author that you're mentioning, yeah. So my book couldn't have been written without the research they've done. So
great. So, I mean, is this the most recent book after Warmonger? Warmonger was published in 2023. Is that right?
Yeah, I also published a book with Dan Kovalek in 2025 about the Syrian. It was called Syria Anatomy of Regime Change, and it looks at a 40-year regime change operation to target the Assad family. So it seeks to place the Syrian U.S. intervention in Syria in historical context, and also looks at the CIA Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the largest CIA covert operation since the Afghan Mujahideen operation in the 80s, and ranks up there as one of the deadly CIA covert operations arming Islamic jihadists like in Afghanistan.
Right. So these guys who are Sunni, right? Sunni guys like, oh, what is it, Georgiani or whatever. Um, but so that was the one in between this most recent one. Can you talk about like the research you did leading up to the publication of this new book, and what the kind of genesis was and the reason for putting this new book together, Political Assassinations in America?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously the topic is very hot with, as you say, the Charlie Kirk, the Epstein, the Trump assassination. That's in the last chapter. Uh, but this book aims to give more, historical context, and it kind of debunks the, myth of the deranged lone gunman as kind of a feature of American popular culture, and it has a certain political utility that I, point out at the beginning. It kind of it manifests this ideology of American exceptionalism, that America doesn't have coups or elite conspiracy, that it's a pure and model democracy that should be exported abroad. And that's, I think, one reason there's so much resistance, even though the evidence is overwhelming for these elite conspiracies. And there's huge literature like on the JFK or RFK or MLK assassination that's extremely well researched and documented. I mean, it's clear that the conspiracy, that there's only a debate as to exact. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened, and who the mastermind. And I mean, there's obviously some disagreements among researchers, but I think there's pretty very strong evidence, overwhelming amount of evidence that the official story was a fraud, and that Oswald was not the lone deranged gunman or Sirhan. Uh, but there's still this deep unwillingness to accept that reality, especially in the elite intellectual culture, in the newspaper and academia. And I think it relates to the political implications of accepting that there are routine political conspiracy at the elite level, and effectively these are coup d'etat, like the Kennedy assassination. I think should be understood as a coup d'etat. But I mean, America is not supposed to have coups. It's supposed to be this great democracy that we export our democracy and to third world countries, and that validates U.S. policy in foreign affairs. Russia and China, they're the autocracy. We're the democracy. They have elite conspiracies, and Putin's a killer, not our leaders. So the reluctance, and that Trump kind of mixed things up when he said, in his first term, he was once asked about Putin. People probably remember, and he said, "Well, we have our killers too." And that, I mean, maybe one reason the liberal elite hates Trump. I mean, there are of course a lot of reasons to hate him, but he also spoke in a candid way that no previous president spoke, and punctured certain mythologies in American political life, just by those statements when he said we have our killers too. And I think more and more people are acknowledging that, but there's still, I think, at the institutional level and elite level, there's a huge backlash. And I mean, the book includes a lot of mainstream media being shows how it's often part of the cover up, and is often denigrating and demeaning independent investigators. Right up to the present day, we see this even in the Charlie Kirk or Epstein, anyone who questioned the official narrative, although many people in the population see that clearly there was a conspiracy at play. But the people who write about this, besides not being able to get published in any prominent newspaper or teach in universities, they're often attacked as conspiracy nuts and all kind of negative names. And that, of course, comes from the CIA had a memo after the Kennedy assassination to denigrate anyone who questioned the Warren Commission report. So that is all still going on. So, and yeah, I had been researching, because I did a series on political assassination for Covert Action magazine. That's how I came to write the book, because I realized there wasn't one single, but there are a lot of good books on particular assassination. Like, well, Kennedy assassination has hundreds, if not thousands, of books. But then there's lesser known, like the Vince Foster, Huey Long. There are a couple books, although in the Huey Long case, I don't think there's been one for many years. Vince Foster, there are a couple good books, and some of these assassinations have one or two good books about them, but there's no book that looks at the pattern and tries to analyze the larger political significance and implication, and understanding the wide number of assassinations and the elite conspiracies and intrigues, that this is actually a pattern, and that completely debunked the narrative that the power elite wants to uphold, again, of the U.S. as this kind of model democracy that doesn't have coups. And the Trump derangements, I think some liberals now say, oh well, Trump is destroying our democracy, and really, though, that's fault. That's, I think, part of the Trump derangement syndrome, because they're not really understanding that, or they don't want to understand that U.S. democracy has been in peril for a long time, and has been sabotaged and destroyed a long time ago. So I mean, Trump may be doing a lot of bad things, but it's a distorted view of history to make it seem like, oh, Trump came along and just destroyed this perfect democracy. That seemed to be the narrative you find on CNN or New York Times, or a lot of mainstream liberals. And it's Trump is destroying democracy, and they don't want to acknowledge the historical pattern. When you have really an oligarchical elite that emerged since the Civil War, if not well before, and that was willing to use violence repeatedly to achieve its end, whether in foreign policy or domestically, and took out any threats, like Huey Long, with a real populace. We don't see somebody like Huey Long today, who is really going after the big corporations and pushing a share of the wealth plan, and a major plan for redistributing wealth and helping the poor people, and speaking out against U.S. imperialism. And he was a real threat. And he was a senator challenging FDR. It was going to challenge FDR in the next election cycle. And he's the most popular politician in the history of the state of Louisiana. He had a huge popular support, was beloved by the people, because he was not a phony. He delivered on his words. He fought hard for the common man, and he was beloved like we haven't seen many politicians who are genuinely loved today. So he was a real threat, and they had to take him out. And there's very strong evidence of a conspiracy. So that's
and that was the same old plot. This is 1935. The lone gunman with some kind of gripe shoots him at the Capitol building or something like that, right? Wasn't it like a state office?
Yeah, well, it was a doctor named Carl Weiss, but the problem is that the gun, and see if I can remember all the fine detail, but there are numerous problems with the official, because, the official story was that he had a family gripe against Huey Long. It was a Sunday night. Long was a senator, and the legislation was meeting for some special legislation, and Long was there and conferring with the governor. And this doctor allegedly went in and shot him. But there's many problems with that story, including the fact that he couldn't get a gun in. Like, he couldn't have been able to walk in with a gun to get past security. And then the gun they found, there's very strong evidence that a gun was placed next to him after, and that he actually did confront Long, but it may have just been a conversation, and at worst he might have punched him. But actually the bullet, and there was a huge cover up in this case, but it came to light that the same bullet was in Weiss, because when this doctor, the official story, he shot Long, and then Long's bodyguard shot him, but it was actually the same caliber bullet in Weiss and in Long. And it's clear they planted a gun next to Long, next to Weiss, but actually that gun didn't have the same caliber bullets that killed Huey Long. So, like, it's very clear that it was a setup to frame Weiss, and that the bodyguard was the one to assassinate Long. And one of the bodyguards had worked for the Al Capone gang before, and also had been a special agent with the FBI. So he was, tied to the so-called deep state. And it came to light that there was a meeting at a posh New Orleans hotel where they picked from a hat who would be the assassin. A lot of money was thrown around. It kind of reminded me of the Kennedy assassination. Billy Sol Estes described a meeting with these fancy the poker group, these Dallas oil billionaires, where they passed a hat around and raised a huge amount of money in one night for the JFK assassination. So, yeah, there is this kind of a pattern there. And I don't think there's been a major book or study on the Long assassinations for many years, but there are some rather obscure books I found written by people, very familiar, who had some kind of personal connection with the case or family member, and who lived in Louisiana, who published books like in the 80s and 90s that have a lot of good details. And also the Unsolved Mysteries, that, to its credit, that was a great show. They did an episode about the Huey Long case, and they presented a lot of critical details, including how they planted the gun, and because they moved Weiss's car, like a member of Weiss's family, after they heard there was some incident at the Capitol, they went there and they realized that his car had somehow been moved, and stuff had been taken out of his car, including the gun. He owned a gun, but like his bag was all ruffled in the car, and they felt somebody had gone in the car, moved it, and gone through his stuff, and then tried to plant the gun after, which wasn't actually the right bullets. So
Right. So it was already creepy then, and he was a great public speaker, and so that was it. The guy I interviewed about Huey Long is Don Jeffries, who's an admirer of
yeah.
Huey Long. So.
Yeah, he's done a lot of good work in these kind of areas of research. Yeah. Long was a real firebrand, and he knew how to relate to the common people in the state of New Orleans. He kind of spoke their language, but they came to respect him because they knew, and he had a strong rhetoric. I mean, he came out of the populist movement and the socialist movement of the early 20th century. I think his father was actually a socialist and had some connection with Eugene Debs. That was an era when the Socialist Party had made inroads in the American South. And he came from a poor background, put himself through law school, but he would give these fiery speeches, denouncing the Standard Oil Corporation, which was prominent in New Orleans, and it resonated with people. But then he delivered. When he got in position of power, he passed all kinds of legislation that followed. He wasn't just like some politicians we know, make promises and never deliver, like Bill Clinton. They said
Donald
the head
Trump.
of the AFL-CIO said he'd pat you on the back and piss down your leg. So, but Huey Long was actually the real deal. He cared about people. He was not just out for his own power, and he did a tremendous amount for the people. And he invested a lot in there. He built up like Louisiana State University, and he built a lot of the roads, and he just invested in infrastructure, and he went after these corporations, with antitrust legislation, so and other kind of laws, and he was pushing forward a share of the wealth program. So they loved him, but the elite really feared him and his kind of politics.
Yeah, they did. He was going to take it nationwide. I think one of his famous statements was "a chicken in every pot," and so he had kind of like a way to reach out to the average guy.
Yeah, he had a kind of folksy rhetoric, and he knew how to.
Yeah, no, he was really something else, and a great loss. Like once that happens, these people get shot. It's like the next populace is like, well, I guess I'm next, or I could be next.
It's an intimidation. They don't want to challenge the power lead. They know what will happen to them, so they take a step back. Yeah, they might do some good thing, but they don't go too far with it.
And there are so many assassinations, huge assassinations in the 60s. JFK, Robert F. Gay, MLK. I've covered a lot of those who are really suspicious, but one I really haven't looked into is Malcolm X. I know that there's a couple documentaries about that, but maybe that's something that we could explore, is like looking into his, because this is another kind. I would actually strangely put him in the same kind of view as Huey P. Long, as somebody who could really reach out to his own people, and then was a great orator, very impactful, but also going through changes. Like I think that Malcolm X could have been I mean, as he became less maybe militant, it seemed like maybe to me, I don't know if you would agree with that, but he could have had a more of an impact if he survived. Like, I don't think he lived past 40, right? I know that MLK did.
Yeah, I forget the exact age Malcolm X was, but yeah, he was not that old. And yeah, he was a magnetic leader who was really, stirring the more impoverished elements of the black population, getting them more politically active, and really encouraging revolt. And that, I think, is what threatened the white elite and white power structure. And yeah, in that case, there was an important revelation. About 5 years ago, a guy who was in the NYPD passed away, and he published a memoir. And basically, what he admitted was that he was part of an operation to lure, like a covert operation, to lure some of Malcolm X's bodyguard, like to get them arrested, so that on that day that he was killed at the Audubon Hotel, he wouldn't have proper bodyguard or people protecting him. They lured them, they like tricked them into participating in a robbery or crime of some kind, so that they were in jail. And this was like the week before, because they planned out the assassination. So they tricked these bodyguards, got them to go. Probably they didn't know what, they just had them, these like they placed informants within the inner circle, and then just convinced them to go somewhere on a certain day, and it implicated them in the robbery as an accessory, and they were put in jail. So they weren't there to protect Malcolm X. So that made it easier as far as the assassination for it to be carried out. And yeah, it's very clear that the FBI was involved. Uh, and
Which
then,
is very similar to MLK, which happened 3 years later, where one of the guys surrounding at that hotel was a known FBI agent, an African American guy. I forgot his name offhand. But
yeah, I think Merrill McCullough was a
yeah,
guy. Yeah, and yeah, they plant agents in the inner circle who then betray them. Yeah, and I think in the King case, there's evidence that Jesse Jackson may have been a turncoat and provided the location of King's room. And there was a switch. They had King switch hotel rooms so he could be more out in the open on this balcony. And then somebody in the inner circle, I think it was his job to get him to go on the balcony around a certain time, to tell him, well, it's ready for time for dinner, and to rush him along because the assassins were ready at a certain time to get him out there. And yeah, I read a lot into that. It's clear that the shots came from the version of the grassy knoll. Like the shot that they alleged to James Earl Ray was really too far. And like in the Oswald case, Ray had no expertise in guns, and was it would have taken like the world best sniper to have actually hit King from the location they claimed Ray did. It actually would have been impossible because there was a tree branch in the way, and he would have to have been hanging out of a window while making this incredible shot, when Ray actually knew nothing about guns. And when he'd been in the military, he'd been, like Oswald, a joke with guns. But they actually cut down, because there was a tree in the way. They cut down the night of the killing. And a witness actually overheard two men speaking and saying, we have to cut down this branch to make it look more plausible that Ray was the shooter. And lo and behold, they cut down the branch overnight.
they do that all the time with these assassinations.
Yeah.
When I was in D.C., where Reagan got shot, after he got shot, they rearranged that whole area. They like tore down the wall where
Yeah.
Hinckley supposedly was, and so you couldn't go back and like look exactly. In my understanding, the same thing happened at JFK, where they cut the trees down because people would have gone. He would have had to shot through these trees, or like these tree branches or something. So
Yeah.
like they adjust the scene after, and
Yeah.
that's what
And
happened with Kirk. They literally, after Charlie Kirk, they like went in and like took all this stuff out and reformed it right away. So the cover-ups happened right away.
Yeah. And I
But
mean,
you want to talk about a coup d'etat too, is also MLK. Jesse Jackson made his career like he's a little bit more milquetoast African American leader. So it's almost like they have somebody waiting in the wings too. Like when these things happen, it's very strange how certain careers get elevated after some of these political hits, particularly a cultural political hit like MLK.
Absolutely, yeah.
But Malcolm X, there's a lot there. Like, I mean, I think he knew that they were coming after him, and they blamed it on the Nation of Islam. They had a good kind of patsy kind of group say that it was an internal squabble with the Nation of Islam, right? Wasn't that the
Mhm.
cover story for Malcolm?
Yeah, it was. But yeah, it was clear that the Nation of Islam had been infiltrated by FBI agents. Uh, and, only one guy, there was a group of them, and most of them got away except for the guy, Talmadge Hayer. He was kind of the fall guy. Uh, and then they got two other guys, but they've actually been I think one won a civil lawsuit. Like there were two guys who were in prison for a long time, but they've basically been exonerated. So it's basically been admitted that they fingered the wrong people. And the real killer, yeah, appears to be this guy who ended up being pretty prominent in the community in Newark and owned like a gym, a boxing gym, I think. And he was actually in an ad with Cory Booker, a
Wow.
political ad. And then he died a few years ago, but it was like known around that community that he was a killer. Like he would go places and somebody would say, "That's Malcolm X's killer." And like people in the community there knew it was him, but he never went to prison for that. So,
And much like MLK, a lot of people don't know this about Martin Luther King, but his brother suspiciously drowned in a pool,
mhm.
and somebody walked in and shot the mother of
Yes.
MLK, which was very, very MK Ultra-ish. Because somebody said the guy just showed up and walked into the church and shot. Like, why would you shoot at like a elderly old woman? And so you see like these hits aren't merely just going after that person, but that's what happened around Malcolm X too, right?
Exactly, yeah, and this rarely gets discussed. Like with King's brother, they claim he drowned in the pool, but everybody knew him and said he was a terrific swimmer, and there's just no way. He was found, I think, in his own pool, and there's never a proper investigation. Like what you're saying, they just intimidate the local police, and there's never a proper investigation. And yeah, I mean, that's what we see in a lot of these cases where witnesses or family members are killed. And there were journalists who died as well. The names are in my book. I think Amir was one, and Louis Lomax was actually a very well known black journalist who had done a lot of work, articles, and reporting on the civil rights movement. And then he was looking into the King case, and he died in a very suspicious car accident. And there was another guy, Leon Amir. So, a number of journalists were killed. I think the two of them may have been investigating both the King and X killings and their connection. And Lomax was particularly well known, even in the mainstream. Like he was quite prominent African American journalist who wrote for, I think, black newspaper, but also some mainstream U.S. media. So that may have been the danger that somebody pretty mainstream was onto the real story. And often, yeah, there are these suspicious car accidents. They're very good at using plane crashes and car accidents because people kind of they don't think it would be a murder if it's a car accident. I think they think it's easier to cover up, but like people who are close to the situation or family members or people who were near who saw the initial crime scene raised suspicion right away in a lot of these cases. And there are cases with Lyndon Johnson in Texas where people died in very suspicious car crashes. Like even Clint Peoples, who's one of the most respected law enforcement officials in Texas history, he was on to Johnson that Lyndon Johnson was behind numerous political murders in the state of Texas going back to the 1940s when he had cheated to win the U.S. Senate. And then Peoples died in a very suspicious car crash. As did this guy Mac Wallace, who was known as LBJ's hitman, and thought to be. I think there's evidence that his fingerprints were found on the sixth floor, the Dealey Plaza, Texas School Book Depository. He died in a very suspicious car crash, and there's evidence of tampering with his brakes and car. So we find, and there's the case of, famous case, that whistleblower in Oklahoma with the nuclear reactors, Karen Smallwood, was also driven off the road. So that seems to be a favored approach. The car crash, or the plane crash. Their book has several the prominent cases where there are these plane crashes that there's clear evidence of airplane sabotage, with Dorothy Hunt, Hale Boggs, Paul Wellstone, and that also is convenient because they're able to often control the scene of the crash, and then the common public, since they control the media, the public thinks, oh, it's a plane crash, small plane crash. Since small planes often crash, they're less suspicious. So, but yeah, I think it is important to understand that in these big murders, there's often many related murders. And we see that in like the Epstein case. Some of Epstein's, like Jean-Luc Brunel was one of Epstein's associates in France. He died in a very suspicious circumstance. So you find that pattern, and it's a deep state crime when you start seeing witnesses and friends and journalists being killed as well.
One of the odd things about Dorothy Hunt is you would think that she was off limits because she was the wife of E. Howard Hunt. It seems odd that they would go after her on that plane crash. That was a commercial airliner too, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. There were a lot of people associated with Watergate killed. That was she was killed in 1972, I believe, December, right when the Watergate scandal was starting to break, or just before it broke. Yeah, and that was a hideous thing. Like there was, I know there was a young journalist who was killed, who was a very attractive African American woman who worked, I think, for NBC News or something, and was really, had great potential, to be a top, like a Barbara Walters type or something. She was on the plane. I think she was doing some interviews about Watergate, and she was doing some investigations. That was in the era where there was some attempt by the media, and some good journalists were trying to get the truth, who had jobs outlets like NBC. We rarely see that today, but in that time there were some good reporters who had jobs with like NBC or some very well-known media, and she was one of them who was trying to really dig into the story, and she was on the plane too. As were I think, some people who had all this information about John N. Mitchell with the Attorney General, and he was involved in all kinds of corrupt and fraudulent schemes to favor certain corporations, or help pass laws that allow them to prevent like antitrust lawsuits and things like that. Some of the people who had the information for his case were on that plane and killed. So it seemed they took out a number of people who had dirt on some very powerful people in that case. But she's not the only. A point I make in the book is that we're taught, like growing up in America, and you take course on the Soviet Union, you learn how Stalin and the Soviets turned on their own, and killed a lot of revolutionaries. And the point I make in the end is that we're not so different, because the CIA is willing to turn on its own people. I mean, and kill them. I mean, William Colby, there's a chapter on that. I mean, he was clearly murdered. They said, and he had spilled all the secrets, at the church committee. And actually, I found in my research that at the time of his death, he was asked to investigate, to be a consultant on this Franklin investigation. The Nebraska
That's right.
state
He was friend
legislature.
with the guy who wrote the Franklin scandal. The guy who wrote the Franklin Scandal worked under Colby in Vietnam, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Dave DeCamp.
Camp, yeah, that's right.
Exactly. He was a state legislator in Nebraska, and he was investigating the sex trafficking ring that went all the way up to some member of the Republican Party and may have gone
George
up.
Bush Sr.,
Yeah,
apparently. Yeah. The
exactly.
very top.
And Colby was brought in as a consultant, and that's when he got killed. And there was a private investigator had worked with been hired by the Nebraska State Legislature, Gary Cardori, and his plane went down. He was killed, and his 8-year-old son. And then I think Colby was investigating that plane crash, which was very suspicious. And that's when they claimed, and Colby was the most meticulous man in the world. Like they claim that like as it was getting dark, he had, because he was his home, there was a half-eaten meal on his table with a bottle of wine open. And the story was that supposedly, well, in the middle of eating a meal, at dusk, he decided to go out canoeing, which was totally against Colby's character, because everybody said he followed like a meticulous schedule and he would never go boating at night. Uh, and then they didn't find his body. Somehow they did a search, and they didn't find any body. And then somehow a week later, his body turned up, like right where his canoe supposedly turned over near his house. So where was the body for that whole week?
It's a classic smiley face killers type killing where the guy disappears out of the ordinary, out of character. He's missing. They search, they look in the spot, and then his body shows up in the spot they previously searched.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And that guy, well, he knew where the bodies were buried. He went all the way back to like World War II and stuff.
Yeah.
And you're right. He was actually, I think my understanding is he was like willing to work with Congress, and they divulged like do a limited hangout to Congress, and like the hardliners, the CIA are like, this guy's betraying us. He was also Irish Catholic, which
because that was with the church committee hearing. He was willing to testify, and actually his son asked him why, and he said, well, I'm doing it to save the agency. Yeah, it's kind of a limited hangout, admit to certain things, and then try and kind of work with Congress to institute some reform that will save the agency. That was his strategy. But you're right, the Shackley, because then George Bush, when he was appointed DCI, he went the opposite approach. He wanted to again cover everything up, stymie any Congress, congressional investigations, stymie the reform that the church committee was starting to develop. And then there are people with him like Theodore Shackley, these hardliners, and Shackley was the head of the Phoenix Project, and he was involved in all. He was a master at political assassination. So it could be that the Shackley network was behind Colby's death. They appear to be clearly behind the death of Danny Casolaro, who we can discuss, was a journalist who was exposing a lot about the deep state, and he was murdered probably by the Shackley George Bush network.
Not surprising. I actually had a guest on who worked at CIA. His name was Ship, and he said that they fired Shackley, supposedly publicly fired Shackley in the 70s or something, and he was at the CIA headquarters, and there's Shackley in his office working. Mm-hmm. So like they did this for like this is how devious these guys are. Mm-hmm. People don't understand this. So like they tell him we're firing, but there he is like carte blanche at the CIA headquarters walking around after supposedly retiring or whatever. So they do these like public things like for the public, going all the way back to Helms and Tullis and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But Casolero's an interesting guy, found in a hotel with very deep cuts on his wrists, investigating what he called the octopus at that time, which was a kind of, talk about a nexus of deep state crimes. It was at that time the nexus of deep state crimes he was investigating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Casolaro was a maverick investigative reporter, and he also had a background in computers, and he had, I think, published a computer newsletter, and he was particularly onto the story of how the CIA had stole this computer software, Promus software, from Bill Hamilton, who was an NSA employee who was a computer genius and had developed this software that he was starting to sell to law enforcement agencies to better coordinate with each other, when they're carrying out criminal cases, and to be able to use computers to pull up case files and background information on suspects and legal cases. But the CIA wanted that software for its own purpose, and they stole. And what Castellaro was uncovering the information about how they set up these dummy companies and stole the software from Bill Hamilton, and how they were using that software to facilitate money laundering, like through the Nugan Bank and its successor, the Bank of Commerce, BCCI. Um, and yeah, using that software for money laundering and to facilitate drug trafficking networks, and also for surveillance, mass surveillance of the population. And then, yeah, he was related to that. He was, I think he was right after he was killed, he had planned to go to Australia because there was an Australian parliamentary commission that had been investigating the Nugan Bank and how the CIA had helped to corrupt Australia and bring in drugs. And some of it was related to the a spy base at Pine Gap. There may have been some irregular activity out of that spy base that this Australian Parliamentary Commission was investigating. And this is in the late 80s. So Castellaro had plans to go to Australia as he was continuing his research. And he had uncovered, I think, key checks and document related to Iran-Contra, and it was putting it together how the computer software was used to help facilitate some of the arms and drug smuggling in the Iran-Contra affair. So he had really a blockbuster book, and that he was, I think, near completed. Was still, doing more research, and he had uncovered also stuff with the October surprise, which was the bribing of the Iranian government to delay the release of the hostages to make Jimmy Carter look bad and help Reagan win the 1980 election. Because these guys, Shackley and Bush, they wanted Reagan in their hardliner after Carter, and after what the Church Committee and what Church and Colby had done. So, yeah, and Castellaro was putting it all together, what he called the octopus, and this criminal cabal led by, I think, George H.W. Bush and Theodore Shackley are at the top of it, along with people like Oliver North and Henry Kissinger, I think, was connected. So, yeah, he was putting everything together and covered a lot of stuff. And, yeah, there's an Australian researcher named Peter Osborne who's done, he's got a website called The Sixth Eye that, if people are interested, I would recommend his website. He's uncovered a lot of new information about Castellaro and the Promise Affair and all that orgy of corruption. And he himself had his own company stolen by the CIA because they also, he was a computer expert and physicist, and he had a software company that the CIA stole because they wanted the encryption code and some of the coding. And that's what led him into this investigation. So
wow,
he's helped uncover new details about all this. And I refer to some of his major finding in my chapter, just as a short chapter kind of summary of the Castellaro case.
And it was the Promise was the kind of the first iteration of a relational database, right? So you put information in, and then it would connect everything else, so you could see everything, right? That was kind of its
Yes,
step
and there
forward.
may be a connection with Jeffrey Epstein. That's when he was starting out, and there's some connection, I think, with him that. Castellaro didn't know about Epstein at that time. Epstein obviously wasn't known to the public. I don't think he was necessarily on Castellaro's radar, but Osborne, I think, has found some connection with the Epstein network. But yeah, you're right. It was a specialized software, and actually, they employed Michael Riconosciuto was a CIA computer genius, and the CIA employed him to put in, and it's beyond my level of understanding because I'm not a technical expert, but I know Riconosciuto was putting in some addition to the software that would enable them to expand its operational uses.
And that's Reconnaissance right there. That's
yeah. And then they frame Reconnaissance, and then there are a bunch of killings that occurred in this Indian reservation in California, because that's where Reconnaissance was working to modify the software, and they were laundering some of the money through the casino, and there were people there who uncovered that corrupt things were going on, and they turned out murdered. And then they framed Reconnaissance, planted drugs on him, and framed him for drugs, and they sent him to prison for like 25 years.
I think he's still in prison. I think that he's still.
No,
I don't know.
Well, he got out in the last couple years. There's a Netflix documentary, although the Netflix documentary appears to be part of the cover-up, because the documentary, which won an Emmy, suggested that Casolaro committed suicide. And Danny, see, this is what we're up against. The media, corporate Hollywood complex is dedicated to continuously covering up these murders and making the public believe that the victim committed suicide, and that the deep state doesn't. There are no political murders.
They found his pictures. I'll see if I can find the pictures of Casolaro. His arms look like 2 or 3 people just sawed over them over and over again.
The cuts were too deep in his arm for suicide. And they found a employee at the hotel saw somebody leaving his room right around the time.
And I think some of his papers were missing. Why would you do all this work? He had been working on it for years, and then at the end, I'm going to publish this. This is going to be amazing. And then he dies, and then his papers are gone. How does that make sense?
Exactly.
The same thing happened with Caradori. He's calling somebody, going, "I got all the goods on these guys. I'm flying back to Omaha," and then boom, plane gets blown. It's a message too. It's you guys are getting too close to this network. Another guy who died around. I don't know if you've ever heard of the artist Mark Lombardi. Have you heard of him?
No,
it's really interesting. I've done a show on him, but he was kind of an artist who did all this Iran Contra affair and looked into the Casolaro network, the octopus, and made art of connecting pieces almost like a Venn diagram. And they're kind of there's a really good documentary about him called "The Conspiracy So Vast," but then he ends up dead too. He's like, "I'm never going to kill myself," and then he ends up committing suicide in a locked room. And an artist, for some reason, who was just starting to sell his work.
Say his name again. I'm going to write
Mark Lombardi, Lombardi, and you can look that up. I've had some of these guys. This guy Butt Bud, who covered Nugan Hand on. Who you mentioned in your book.
Excellent book. Yeah, I read his book. Yeah.
But Lombardi's an interesting piece of the puzzle, and a great artist, and really visualized all this stuff, and became kind of like that schizo kind of rabbit hole investigator who would possesses him and changes his life. That's what happened to Lombardi, and then he dies young. But the documentary about him is really something else. So these networks of people are all out there, and all these names kind of overlap, and Pauly and Donovan and Bush Sr. and Shackley. I mean, and then the deaths that surround them. There are just suspicious deaths around these guys all the time. And some of these other ones, so they're they will kill their own. And one of them is Mary Pinchot Meyer. It's a really interesting person, but really within this whole CIA kind of Eastern elite network, she was part of it, but something went wrong, and they with the cover up post JFK, she got caught up in the web, right?
Yeah. Well, and the question is, if she may have been part of and the mystery that we may never know is exactly what she was doing, and if she was part of MK Ultra, because she had a meeting with Timothy Leary, and she had a lot of interest in his research into LSD and expertise with LSD, and then Leary allegedly slept with her and then turned her on to LSD. And then, this was before, then pretty soon after, she had an affair with JFK. and allegedly may have turned him on to acid. And it's not clear if they were doing some kind of MK Ultra experiment on the president. And Leary remarked that she had this kind of hard look of a seasoned political operative who was in a tough political world. Leary wrote something to that effect in his memoir. Although there is a book that was written by Peter Janney, who's I think related to her or was friends with her son or family, that kind of presents her as somebody who broke from the CIA, and because she was married to Cord Meyer, who was a very famous CIA operative, who was the head of Operation Mockingbird and all kind of devious operations, and they divorced. And he presents it that she kind of became this do-gooder after, and was very critical of the CIA. But it's not clear because with the CIA they're always deceptive. They present fronts to people, and they could still be working for the agency. So I'm a bit suspicious of her link with Leary and with the MK Ultra, and that she may have been partaking in that. And that could have been one reason they murdered her, because she knew too much about that. And also, I think she knew about the JFK assassination, certain things, because Angleton, after her death, Angleton went in her home and stole her diary, and I think destroyed it. So,
right. So,
and that's in the Janney book, which is a good book. It
was a bestseller.
Yeah.
Janney, I think Janney's dad was a CIA asset.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Here's the name of the documentary. It's Mark Lombardi, Death-Defying Acts of Art and Conspiracy. And you can kind of see his style here. So these were, and he would do these vast pieces that would take up whole walls with connecting dots and all these corporations and individuals and who's involved. This is pre-internet, which makes it more fascinating because you'll see these kind of like mindscapes or mind things where people do this online where there are lines connecting stuff. But he was the precursor to that. This guy, Mark Lombardi. Let me see if I can find his picture. But yeah, so she's right. One of those. One of the other things a lot of people don't realize, and I've done shows on Jim Jones, is that Leo Ryan was a CIA critic. People remember the whole story of what happened. I think it was 1980. Was that right? Was Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown and was killed, and then like a week later, the Moscone and who was the gay activist?
Harvey Milk
murders happened. So these are like really incredible events that really changed a lot of history, both together.
Yeah. I have a chapter on Leo Ryan killing, and it was around that time. I double checked the date, but it may have been 1978 or 79. And he was investigating. Well, he had sponsored the Hughes-Ryan Amendment, which was one of the most far-reaching anti-CIA legislation that would have really put the brakes on CIA covert activity, and they would have to. It set really stringent measures for the CIA having to report all of their activity to Congress, and establishing much broader transparency over the CIA. So what a coincidence that he turns up, the foremost congressional enemy of the CIA, turns up dead. And he was investigating the Jonestown cult because he was the representative for that area where they had Jonestown in Berkeley. And I think also one of his daughters got involved in the religious cult. So he had done a lot of research and investigation into cults and how they operated. And then he went to Jonestown, although some say he was lured there, that they had a plan to kill him. And it's evident that, they tried to frame this guy, Larry Layton, for his death. But there were witnesses who saw a tall man in military fatigues who shot him. And it looked like he was a Green Beret or maybe a CIA operative who shot him, not Layton. And Layton, talk about MK Ultra. He was like totally zonked out and drugged. And they said he looked like a zombie when they arrested him. And it wasn't people who had known Larry, who had been an honorable person. He had been involved in the anti-Vietnam movement, and he worked as a nurse and stuff. I mean, he was a a likable and good guy. But the guy that he morphed into, he looked like a zombie. And the trial was clearly like, and that's what we find in a lot of these cases, and we see the compromise in the American criminal justice system because it's not a real or fair trial. And this guy was clearly framed for that killing, and he appeared to be an MK Ultra victim. And I don't know if he had a gun or fired any shots, but they fingered him. But this looks to be like a professional intelligence military operation to kill him. And he may have known some stuff because Jonestown, like I had an article about that. It drew off some good research that was done by John Judge and William Michael Myers that showed that Jones had links, was outed as a CIA agent in Brazil in the 1960s. And there's a very strong indication that Jones, it was a CIA operation, that he had lured people to Jonestown, that they were doing MK Ultra experiments there because they found a copious amount of drugs at the Jonestown facility, after everybody was killed. And actually, it was clear that they, the official story that they drank the Kool-Aid, and you always hear that expression, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid," which is generally good advice, but think independently. But in this case, it seemed that actually nobody drank the Kool-Aid, that they were all murdered to cover up what was going on in Jonestown, which was sadistic, like Nazi-type medical experimentation. Because I think that's what Ryan had noticed, is that the people who were there, it was supposed to be this kind of hippie commune. People had joined that church. A lot of them were active in the counterculture, social movements of the 60s, and they were looking to have some religion in their life, but to sustain their political activism. The idea of the Jonestown is set up as this kind of hippie commune, with a spiritual element. They had teaching, teachers brought in and stuff. But really, then they were subjected to like mind control and MK Ultra experiments, and a lot of them appeared to be zombies because they had been drugged. And Ryan was witnessing this, and that's maybe another reason they had to kill him. And then they killed everybody there. There were a few survivors, and investigators found that they had been shot, that it wasn't the Kool-Aid that they drank. They were shot, and Jones may have actually had a double and got away because the person killed resembled Jones, but then they found he had some markings that indicated it wasn't Jones. And for a supposed suicide, the gun was found far away from him. So professional investigators felt that there's a strong possibility that Jones may have escaped with CIA assistance, because they had been using that to continue MK Ultra, because MK Ultra stopped, after the church hearings, they shut it down. But then investigators found that they continued MK Ultra experiment through religious cults. And so that would be perfect. And they were also using that to, there was like a part of the Jonestown land they were using, there were paramilitary training exercises, and they were training like mercenaries and special forces to be sent to Angola and other far off places that the CIA was involved in, that they didn't want the American public to know the U.S. government had a hand in those countries. So they were using Jonestown for secret training. And that's another reason they may have had to kill the people there, because they knew about these secrets and covert criminal activity.
It's just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And there was something about, like, it does 850 people died there, like an incredible amount. But there was
Yeah.
something about the bodies being moved, or like there were 400 who died, and then 400 were found around the back. It's just really strange stuff. And there,
Yeah.
so this is a recorded statement. I've done a show with, I can't remember, but he handled the song. He was an attorney, Paul Morantz, rest in peace, Paul. There was a guy, they said, "Get Dyer out of here," DYER. He was like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
it's CIA agent. So people
Exactly.
who think that this is outlandish or just
Yeah.
like hyper paranoid, they don't know the facts, because the
I
facts
know.
are
It
much.
boggles my own mind. Like
Yeah.
I just, I didn't think twice about the official story about Jonestown until I read the John Judge and Michael Myers books, and they actually had, tremendous amount of evidence to back it up. and it made complete sense what they were saying, unfortunately. And I found that with so many other things like Oklahoma City bombing. Well, we don't have to go into it today, but I can go into another time. But then I moved. I didn't think twice about that. And that Timothy McVeigh was this crazy white supremacist. But then I got a job in Oklahoma, moved there, and just met people who had been there. Grew up in Oklahoma City and were around the building or living there at the time. They said, no, they're two bombed. They're not one. We all heard two blasts, and they all knew the kind of local knowledge that McVeigh was not was set up as a patsy. So, and then I read more into it. And usually there are books available. It's just like they're not featured prominently, and they're not reviewed in the New York Times or on the shelves of Barnes and Noble, but you can find them. Not too, it's not too hard to find them on the internet, and if you have a good library that has interlibrary loan, you can get almost any book. So, they don't get the prominence, but a lot of these topics have been researched pretty in depth by good independent researchers.
And they make those connections between people and these nexuses and these overlaps, like these networks like Castellaro did. Like there really is just like there is a deep state criminal network that's been around, and Epstein's part of it. You can see into it in his files, and it's really just there's probably always been black networks going back through history. It's just become more ornate with traveling and technology now, but it really is like an incredible stuff. Jeff asked, has the same Jonestown strategy been used again? What do you think about that? Do you know if like Jonestown was 1980, I think?
I would imagine it had. I think that MK Ultra continues, but very clandestinely, and I think that they use religious cults. One thing that is very suspicious is the Branch Davidian group and the assault on the David Koresh. I think there's a book by what the author's name, Victor Thorne was one book I read where he addressed that, and he suggested that may be one reason they destroyed the. That in Waco, where was that? Waco, right? Waco, Texas. Yeah. The FBI and ATF and Clinton administration destroyed the Branch Davidian compound and murdered David Koresh and a lot of women and children. And the official story was that he was this, serial sexual abuser, and he was, I don't know I can't remember how they could justify destroying a whole building and compound. I guess they said he was armed or something, but why they had to kill all those women and children. But this book by the author I just mentioned, Victor Thorne, suggests that was one place I read. It may have come up in a few other books, was suggesting that they were doing that Koresh had a tie to the CIA, and that he was involved in MK Ultra experiments on his followers. As they use cult leader, because the CIA, they're trying to. I mean, that was part of the aim of MK Ultra, was to learn ways to manipulate people and to either use drugs or other techniques, psychological techniques to like brainwash and program and manipulate people. And that's something cult leaders are good at doing. So, and some of these cult leaders may actually be products of MK Ultra or a background in it. And they have a symbiotic relation with the CIA, who's continues some of the experiments. So I think the Branch Davidian was one, as far as the question about continuity after Jonestown. And then you'd have to look, maybe some of these other cases, like the Nexvim,
Nexium,
with the Bronfman daughters, they're tied to the deep state. So maybe we don't
culture creation, like they were tied to like World Peace Day or whatever, or Flat Earth Day or whatever. What is it?
Yeah, the Bronfman have background in organized crime and strong tie with the, I think, covert intelligence agency. So who knows about, maybe they set up this guy Rainier, the fall guy, because he got like a ridiculous prison sentence. I mean, clearly he was doing some bad things, but he got like 180 years in prison. It seemed excessive for he's not a murderer. So I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating. I don't know about the Nexum, but I would just that could be something of suspicion. That maybe there's something there. But other stuff we don't know about. But I would imagine it exists, knowing that they've done this before.
Right. I mean, it's amazing. Course in Miracles is a part of the MK Ultra operation. It's still around today, and there's that one politician woman who's like a believer in Course in Miracles, which was like a sub project of the CIA. So they're involved in cult kind of religion creation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
another one is Daniel DeFreeze in the SLA, which
Mm-hmm.
to me is like totally made up. Daniel DeFreeze was not a smart guy. He didn't have the intelligence, in my opinion, to put that. He was kind of like a petty crook, kind of like James Earl Ray, but
Mm-hmm.
he took on this kind of persona, and that ended up in disaster too. They had to clean that up. They had to do a cleanup operation and make sure all the members were killed in 1974 in a shootout.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and then there's this chaos operation that makes the left look absolutely bonkers. To the
Mm-hmm.
public, they look like they're out of their mind, which was part of this goal to destabilize kind of, in my opinion, well-meaning movements, political and cultural movements. The anti-war is a good thing, and peace amongst other people is a good thing, which really was a thing, I guess, on the left at one point. But they had to make that look like they're all like Charles Manson or Daniel. This
Mm-hmm.
Daniel DeFreeze, I remember his last name's DeFreeze.
Yeah, Donald DeFreeze.
Donald
Yeah,
DeFreeze,
and
thank
there's a
you.
good book by Brad Schreiber. Maybe
Yeah,
you
I've
had
had
him
it.
on.
It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite books is
Mm-hmm.
Revolution's End.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
great.
see, often the truth only comes to light years later. Like in the 70s, 80s, if you said this, you'd say, "Oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist." The CIA was not behind that, and then lo and behold, we learned that it was. So yeah, who knows what's going on now? We might learn about it in 20 or 30 years. What
Right,
they're
but you
doing
can
now.
now you can compare these events. You weren't able to do that with the media back then. So
Mm-hmm.
all these things were seen as separate. That's one of the great thing your book does, is that you can see all these events and the parallels and similarities and the backgrounds and the deaths surrounding these events. So they're like controlled, almost like somebody is treating subjects in a lab or something. We got to
Mm-hmm.
get rid of him, or like, and you see these connections. Like one of the crazy things about like tying Manson to DeFreeze or the family to SLA is that there's like MK Ultra doctors around all the place. So
Mm-hmm.
you have Jolly and West like literally on the stand talking about Patty Hearst, and Colston Westbrook is like another guy from Vietnam who worked on Phoenix, which there's a lot of very, very dark actors involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of these techniques are brought back to the States. You weren't able to really put these things together in this kind of like Hieronymus Bosch nightmare, hellscape that really I think your book really shows is that you're right. This democracy is just built on assassinations. There's just so many assassinations. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for this.
We are at the 1 hour, 8 minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed? I mean, the book's available now, right?
It should be available very soon. Yeah, I think it's said on Amazon either July 15th or August 1st. So
It
if you
says it's for
order it,
sale right now. I mean,
yeah,
on Amazon, I'm looking at it. So
yeah,
definitely.
it should be available. Yeah, and hopefully it's a good resource for people. Yeah, as you say, it aims to tie it together. Show that pattern at work, and yeah, in many ways they learn. It's like a learning curve, and they've developed an expertise, but they only get away with it. Yeah, I think the role of the media is very important, an educational system, and that may be an area. I think people can make a difference by. I mean, I think online media outlets are starting to replace the traditional media because they're so compromised. And like, with the Epstein and the Charlie Kirk, people are onto that right away. They know there's something fishy, and you find some really good stuff online, to puncture the official story. So, yeah, I think that is a very good thing because exposure is important. To expose these criminal networks is the first step. to ultimately trying to rein them in.
Yeah, and exposure is it, and then they won't do it again if they're getting caught, because
Yeah.
you're seeing some of the stuff laid out. I didn't read the last part of your epilogue about Epstein or Kirk, but like some of their narratives are just being eviscerated, like really
Mhm.
bad. Like
Yeah.
they're taking apart this whole story of this guy who supposedly killed Kirk,
Hmm.
Tyler Robinson. So, um, and then you also are doing a lot of writing for Covert Action Mag, which is online now, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's an online magazine. Yeah, it was a print magazine. It was founded in the 1970s, and then it shut down. Philip, because it was founded by CIA whistleblower Philip Agee, who passed away in 2009. But then his son revived the magazine in 2018 or 19 as an online magazine. So, and we publish. I'm the editor, and we publish 5 articles every week. So, and some are historical articles. Like this week, we had one on the CIA and Mossad operation in Africa and Uganda, and how they supported Idi Amin. Little known history. So, yeah, we have a lot of historical articles uh, trying to educate people, or bring up that history so we can. And by studying the history, yeah, you can see how they operate. So you could basically know what they're doing today. And it shows. In the case of Uganda, they've been promoting another dictator who's probably worse than Idi Amin, Yoweri Museveni, who's been in power in Uganda since 1986, and he's invaded numerous countries, plundered, the Congo, uh, and he's killed a lot of people. But the U.S. and CIA have been supporting him. The U.S. has military bases in Uganda, and U.S. corporate. He's given U.S. corporations favorable operating term in the country. So and that's why they supported Idi Amin, because he replaced a socialist leader who wanted to nationalize, place Uganda's businesses and industry and natural resources under national control. And Idi Amin opened it up to foreign corporation. That's why initially they supported him. Eventually, they turned against him when he didn't kind of play by the rules they wanted, and he became an international embarrassment. But they helped bring him in the first place. So,
Interesting. Yeah, turned on him, got rid of him.
yeah,
This guy was notorious for eating people's livers. Like he literally admitted it. Idi
yeah.
Amin did.
Well,
Um,
there may have been some exaggeration.
okay,
According
well,
to
I
some
do.
author, I mean, he was terrible, but I think there was some exaggeration, like stereotypes about African that maybe went too far. Uh, but yeah, I mean, the article also shows how the Mossad, functioned as a kind of adjunct of the CIA and did a lot of its dirty work in Africa. And there's an Operation KK, not MK Ultra, but oh no, KK Mountain uh, was another covert CIA operation where they used the Israelis to do, install these dictators in Africa and get the Israelis to do a lot of the legwork and supply a lot of the weapons. So the U.S. can claim, plausible deniability, just like a lot of these other things we're talking about. They don't want to have their hand directly in it, so they, use third party, and that's how Israel has been so useful to American interests, and why one reason why the U.S. has supported it so heavily.
Jeremy, I got to run. Sorry, but great talk and congrats on the new book. Highly recommend it. People check it out. I know it's available on Amazon. It's published by Clarity Press. I think you can buy it through Clarity Press as well. And the
Mm-hmm.
full title again is Political Assassinations in America: The Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. And it's Jeremy Kuzmarov, Kuzmarov. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Enjoyed the
stay there
discussion.
for a second. Stay there. So anyway.